Rosa Delgado moved through the grand hacienda like a shadow at dawn. Her soft leather moccasins made no sound against the polished wooden floors as she carried fresh linens through the sprawling corridors. The early morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long golden streaks across the adobe walls that had stood for 3 generations. At 19, Rosa possessed the grace of her Apache mother and the determined spirit her Mexican father had admired. Her dark hair was braided with small turquoise beads that caught the light as she worked. The other servants often whispered about her strange heritage, but Rosa paid them no mind. She had duties to fulfill, and the Valdez family paid her well enough to send money home to her aging grandmother. Don Carlos Valdez owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory. His wife, Señora Elena, demanded perfection in all household matters. Rosa had learned quickly that attention to detail meant the difference between a peaceful day and harsh words from the mistress. Every morning, she followed the same routine: fresh flowers in the dining room, clean sheets in the guest quarters, and careful dusting of the family's precious belongings. The hacienda buzzed with unusual activity this particular morning. Don Carlos had invited important guests from Santa Fe to discuss a cattle contract. Rosa noticed the extra tension in the cook's voice and the way the butler checked his pocket watch more frequently than usual. Important visitors meant everything had to be absolutely perfect. Rosa climbed the wide staircase to the second floor, her arms full of starched white sheets. The guest wing contained 5 bedrooms, each decorated with fine furniture brought from Mexico City. Heavy wooden crosses hung above every bed, and colorful woven blankets served as wall decorations. Rosa took pride in making each room welcoming for visitors. She entered the first guest room and immediately noticed something odd. The bed covers were rumpled in a strange pattern, as if someone had been hiding beneath them. Rosa frowned. She had prepared this room yesterday afternoon, and no guests were expected until evening. The household staff knew better than to use the guest quarters for rest. Moving closer to investigate, Rosa heard a soft rustling sound from beneath the thick woolen blankets. Her heart began to race. In Apache tradition, unexpected sounds often meant danger lurked nearby. She set down her bundle of clean linens and approached the bed cautiously. The rustling grew more distinct. Something or someone was definitely moving under those covers. Rosa's mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps a wild animal had somehow entered through an open window. Mountain cats sometimes wandered close to the ranch during dry seasons, searching for water sources. She picked up a wooden chair, holding it like a shield as she moved toward the bed. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Rosa's breathing became shallow as she prepared to discover what lay hidden beneath the blankets. With one quick motion, she grabbed the edge of the heavy woolen cover and yanked it back. What she discovered made her gasp and nearly drop the chair she clutched. A young man lay curled in the bed, his clothes torn and stained with dried blood. His face was pale, with several days' worth of stubble covering his jaw. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and Rosa could see that he was barely conscious. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Don't call for help." Rosa stared at him, her mind spinning. This stranger had somehow entered the Valdez hacienda and hidden in the guest quarters. His clothes suggested he was a cowboy or ranch hand, but she didn't recognize him from any of the neighboring properties. More concerning were the obvious signs that he was injured and running from something or someone. "Who are you?" she demanded, keeping her voice low. "How did you get in here?" The young man tried to sit up but winced in pain and fell back against the pillows. "My name is Jake Morrison. I rode in last night through the back pasture. I was shot by rustlers near Copper Creek." Rosa's Apache instincts told her to be cautious. Strangers often brought trouble, and the Valdez family had enemies who might send someone to cause harm. But her compassionate nature recognized genuine pain and fear in the young man's eyes. "You cannot stay here," she said firmly. "Don Carlos is expecting important guests today. If they find you, there will be serious trouble." Jake Morrison nodded weakly. "I understand. I just needed a safe place to rest until I could figure out what to do. Those rustlers killed my partner and stole our cattle." They think I'm dead too, but I managed to escape. Rosa studied his face carefully. Her Apache grandfather had taught her to read truth in people's expressions. This young man seemed genuinely afraid and hurt, not dangerous. Still, her position in the household meant she couldn't afford to make mistakes. "You need medical attention," she observed, noticing the dark stains on his shirt. "How badly are you wounded?" Jake lifted his shirt slightly, revealing a bullet wound in his shoulder that had stopped bleeding but clearly needed proper treatment. "It went clean through. I managed to bandage it with my neckerchief, but it needs cleaning." Rosa made a quick decision. "I will bring you water and clean cloth. But you must leave before the guests arrive this evening. I cannot risk my position here." She hurried to gather medical supplies from the kitchen, being careful not to attract attention from the other servants. The cook was busy preparing for the evening meal, and the butler was inspecting the dining room silverware. Rosa managed to collect clean water, soap, and bandages without anyone questioning her activities. Returning to the guest room, she found Jake sitting on the edge of the bed, looking slightly stronger but still very pale. Rosa had helped her Apache grandmother treat injuries before, so she knew basic wound care techniques. "This will hurt," she warned as she began cleaning the bullet wound. Jake gritted his teeth but remained silent as Rosa worked. She noticed calluses on his hands that suggested honest work, and his boots were worn from long hours in the saddle. These details supported his claim of being a legitimate cowboy rather than an outlaw. "Tell me what happened," Rosa said as she applied fresh bandages. "Why were these rustlers at Copper Creek?" Jake explained that he and his partner had been driving a small herd of cattle to market when they encountered a group of men stealing livestock from various ranches. They had brands from at least 3 different properties mixed in with their herd. When we tried to report what we saw, they started shooting. Rosa finished treating his wound and stepped back. "You should report this to the sheriff in town." "I can't trust anyone right now," Jake replied. "Those rustlers knew exactly where to find us. Someone told them our route and timing. There might be people in town working with them." This revelation troubled Rosa. Cattle rustling had been increasing in the territory, and honest ranchers like Don Carlos were losing significant numbers of livestock. If corrupt officials were involved, the situation was more serious than anyone realized. A sudden sound in the hallway made both of them freeze. Heavy footsteps approached the guest room, accompanied by the familiar voice of Senora Elena giving instructions to another servant. Quickly, Rosa whispered, helping Jake back under the covers. "Pretend to be asleep if anyone enters." She grabbed her bundle of clean linens and tried to look busy arranging them in the wardrobe. The footsteps paused just outside the door, and Rosa heard Senora Elena's voice clearly. "Make sure all the guest rooms are perfectly prepared. Don Carlos wants everything to impress these buyers from Santa Fe." The footsteps continued down the hallway, but Rosa knew they would return soon. She had to find a way to move Jake to safety before the evening guests arrived. But where could she hide an injured stranger without arousing suspicion? Jake seemed to read her thoughts. "Is there anywhere else I could go? A barn or storage building?" Rosa considered the possibilities. The main barn was too active during the day, with ranch hands constantly coming and going. The storage buildings were regularly checked by the foreman. But there was one place that might work. "There is an old adobe building behind the vegetable garden," she said thoughtfully. "It was used for storing grain years ago, but now it sits mostly empty. The roof leaks, but it would provide shelter." "That sounds perfect," Jake said gratefully. "When can we move there?" Rosa calculated the household schedule in her mind. During the afternoon siesta. Most of the servants rest for 2 hours, and the family retreats to their private quarters. "I can guide you there then, Dot." The rest of the morning passed slowly as Rosa went about her regular duties while worrying about the injured stranger hidden in the guest room. She brought him water and some bread during a brief moment when the hallway was empty, but she knew his presence couldn't remain secret much longer. Finally, the afternoon siesta arrived. Rosa waited until the hacienda grew quiet, then returned to the guest room. Jake was sitting by the window, watching the ranch activities below. "It's time," she whispered. They moved carefully through the corridors, Rosa leading the way and checking for any signs of other people. Jake walked slowly but steadily, his color looking better after rest and basic medical care. The old grain storage building stood partly hidden behind tall sunflower plants that Rosa's predecessor had planted years before. The adobe walls were thick and strong, though the wooden roof showed clear signs of weather damage. Inside, the space was dry and reasonably comfortable. "This will work well," Jake said, settling onto a pile of old sacks. "Thank you for helping me. I know you're taking a big risk." Rosa felt conflicted about her decision. Her Apache heritage valued helping those in need, but her practical situation required avoiding any trouble that might cost her employment. "I will bring you food and water when I can, but you must be very careful. If anyone discovers you here, I cannot protect you." As she prepared to leave, Jake caught her hand gently. "What is your name? I want to know who my angel of mercy is." "Rosa," she replied simply. "Rosa Delgado." "Thank you, Rosa Delgado. When this is over, I promise to repay your kindness somehow." Rosa returned to the hacienda just as the household was awakening from siesta. The evening preparations were beginning, and she had her own duties to complete. But her mind kept returning to the injured stranger hiding in the old grain building. That evening, Don Carlos welcomed his guests with a grand feast in the main dining room. Rosa served alongside the other household staff, ensuring that every glass stayed filled and every plate was promptly cleared. The conversation focused on cattle prices and market conditions, but Rosa noticed the men also discussed problems with rustlers. "We've lost nearly 50 head in the past month," complained one of the visiting ranchers. "These thieves are getting bolder and more organized." Don Carlos nodded grimly. "My vaqueros found evidence of a large herd being moved through our northern pastures last week. The tracks suggested at least 200 head of mixed cattle." Rosa's heart raced as she realized Jake's story was connecting with the rancher's experiences. The rustling operation was apparently much larger than anyone had imagined. After the guests retired to their rooms, Rosa managed to slip away with leftover food from the kitchen. She made her way carefully through the dark garden to the old storage building, guided by moonlight and her knowledge of every path on the property. Jake was awake and alert when she arrived. "How do you feel?" she asked, offering him the food. "Much better, thanks to your care," he replied. "I've been thinking about what to do next. Those rustlers will eventually realize I survived and come looking for me." "The ranchers at dinner tonight were discussing cattle theft," Rosa reported. "Don Carlos mentioned finding tracks from a large herd on his property." Jake's expression grew serious. "That confirms what I suspected. This isn't just small-time rustling. Someone is organizing a major operation to steal cattle from multiple ranches." As they talked quietly in the moonlight, Rosa realized that Jake Morrison represented something more than just a wounded stranger seeking help. He might be the key to solving a problem that was affecting everyone in the territory, including her employers. 3 days passed in careful routine. Rosa continued her household duties while secretly caring for Jake in the abandoned grain building. His strength returned gradually, and the bullet wound showed signs of proper healing. During their evening meetings, he shared more details about the rustling operation he had discovered. "They have a system," Jake explained as Rosa changed his bandages by lamplight. "Someone scouts the ranches and reports on herd movements. Another group handles the actual theft, and a third moves the stolen cattle to buyers in different territories." Rosa listened intently while cleaning the wound. "That requires many people working together. Do you think someone from town is involved?" "Has to be," Jake replied grimly. "They knew exactly when and where to intercept us. My partner Tom and I only told 3 people about our route to market." The implications troubled Rosa deeply. If local officials or businessmen were connected to the rustling ring, then honest ranchers like Don Carlos faced a serious threat. Her own livelihood depended on the ranch's prosperity, and her grandmother relied on the money Rosa sent home each month. "Who did you tell about your plans?" she asked carefully. Jake counted on his fingers. The cattle buyer in Santa Fe, Sheriff Rodriguez in town, and the clerk at the telegraph office who sent our arrival message. Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. Sheriff Rodriguez had eaten dinner at the Valdez Hacienda several times in recent months. Don Carlos often consulted with him about security matters and cattle protection. If the sheriff was corrupt, then every rancher in the area was vulnerable. You cannot trust the sheriff, Rosa said firmly. But Don Carlos needs to know about this threat to his cattle. Jake shook his head. How can you be sure your employer isn't involved? Large ranch owners sometimes participate in rustling from their competitors. The suggestion offended Rosa's sense of loyalty. Don Carlos is an honest man. He treats his workers fairly and pays good wages. His family has owned this land for generations. Maybe so, Jake conceded. But I can't risk exposing myself to anyone until I know who can be trusted. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching the hacienda. Through the small window in the storage building, they could see torches moving along the main road. Rosa recognized the voices of night riders calling out to the ranch guards. Something is wrong, she whispered, moving closer to listen. The riders were reporting an attack on a neighboring ranch. Rustlers had struck the Morrison property during the night, stealing nearly the entire herd and burning the main house. Rosa glanced at Jake, whose face had gone pale in the lamplight. That's my family's ranch, he said quietly. My father and younger brother live there. Rosa felt her heart sink. We must find out if they are safe. Jake struggled to stand, despite his healing injury. I have to go to them. If those rustlers discovered I survived, they might have targeted my family as revenge. You are not strong enough for a long ride, Rosa protested. And if those men are watching for you, riding into the open will be suicide. They listened as the night riders provided more details to Don Carlos and his foreman. The Morrison house had been completely destroyed, but no bodies were found inside. Tracks suggested the family might have escaped before the attack began. Your father and brother probably fled to safety, Rosa said hopefully. Many ranchers have emergency plans for such attacks. Jake paced the small storage room despite his obvious discomfort. I taught my brother to hide in the old mine shaft if rustlers ever came. But I need to know for certain they escaped. Rosa made a difficult decision. I will go into town tomorrow and gather information. As a servant, I can ask questions without attracting attention. That's too dangerous, Jake objected. If these rustlers have people watching the town, they might recognize you as someone asking about the Morrison family. I have ways to be invisible, Rosa replied with quiet confidence. My Apache heritage includes skills that most people do not expect from a household servant. The next morning, Rosa requested permission from Senora Elena to visit the market for special ingredients. She often made such trips, so the request raised no suspicions. Dressed in her simplest clothing and carrying a market basket, she rode the household mule into town. The main street buzzed with conversation about the Morrison Ranch attack. Rosa listened carefully while pretending to shop for vegetables and dry goods. The details she gathered painted a grim picture. According to witnesses, the rustlers had arrived in large numbers just before dawn. They had systematically rounded up the cattle while a separate group set fire to the buildings. Old Pete Morrison and his younger son were reportedly seen escaping on horseback toward the mountains. Rosa's relief was tempered by additional news. Sheriff Rodriguez was organizing a search party to hunt for Jake Morrison, claiming he was wanted for questioning about the rustling activities. The sheriff suggested that Jake might have been working with the thieves and survived the attack because of his cooperation. This information confirmed Jake's suspicions about corruption in the sheriff's office. Rosa realized she needed to warn him immediately and help him avoid the organized search. She completed her market purchases quickly and returned to the ranch. Finding a moment to slip away from her duties, she hurried to the grain storage building with news and supplies. Your father and brother escaped safely, she reported. But Sheriff Rodriguez is hunting for you. He claims you were working with the rustlers. Jake's anger flared at this news. He's trying to frame me to cover his own involvement. If he can convince people I'm guilty, no one will believe anything I say about corruption. Rosa handed him additional food and medical supplies. You cannot stay here much longer. The sheriff might expand his search to include all the neighboring ranches. I need to reach my family and warn other ranchers about what's happening, Jake said. But, first, I want to gather evidence against the corrupt officials. How can we do that? Rosa asked. Jake had been thinking about this problem during his recovery. Those rustlers have to store the stolen cattle somewhere before moving them to market. If we can find their holding area, we might discover proof of who was protecting them. Rosa considered the logistics. A large herd would need water and grass. There are only a few locations in this territory with sufficient resources. Exactly, Jake agreed. And those locations would need to be isolated enough to hide hundreds of cattle from honest law enforcement. They spent the next hour discussing possible locations. Rosa's knowledge of the local geography, combined with Jake's experience as a cattleman, helped them identify 3 likely areas where rustlers might hide stolen livestock. The old Spanish land grant north of Devil's Canyon would be perfect, Rosa suggested. There are natural water sources and grass, but no active ranches nearby. Jake nodded. That's about a day's ride from here. If we could scout that area without being detected, we might find the evidence we need. We? Rosa questioned. I cannot abandon my duties here without raising suspicions. I know it's asking a lot, Jake said earnestly. But I need someone who knows the territory and can help me avoid the search parties. You have skills they don't expect. Rosa felt torn between her responsibilities to the Valdez family and her growing commitment to helping Jake expose the rustling conspiracy. Her Apache grandfather had always taught that fighting injustice was more important than personal safety. If we do this, we must be very careful, she said finally. And we need a plan for what happens after we find evidence. Jake's face brightened with hope. We take what we learn directly to the territorial governor's office. He has authority over corrupt local officials. That evening, Rosa made preparations for a dangerous journey. She told Senora Elena she needed to visit her sick grandmother for several days, a lie that troubled her conscience but seemed necessary for the greater good. She packed supplies carefully, including water, dried meat, and blankets. Her Apache heritage included traditional skills for traveling quietly through wilderness areas. She also borrowed a reliable horse from the ranch stock, knowing she would face serious consequences if her deception was discovered. Jake's strength had improved enough for hard travel, though Rosa knew the journey would test his healing shoulder wound. They planned to leave before dawn and travel by paths that avoided the main roads where search parties might patrol. As they prepared to depart in the pre-dawn darkness, Rosa felt a mixture of fear and determination. She was risking everything she had worked to build, but the alternative was allowing corruption and violence to destroy the honest ranching families who provided her livelihood. Are you certain about this? Jake asked one final time as they led their horses quietly away from the ranch buildings. Rosa thought about her grandmother's teachings regarding courage and justice. My people believe that some fights choose the warriors, rather than warriors choosing the fights. They mounted their horses and rode into the darkness, following deer trails and hidden paths that Rosa had learned during childhood explorations. The journey to Devil's Canyon would take them through some of the most remote and dangerous territory in the region. As the sun rose behind them, Rosa realized there would be no turning back from the path they had chosen. Whether they succeeded or failed, her life at the Valdez Ranch was ending. She could only hope their dangerous mission would protect other innocent families from the rustling conspiracy. The landscape ahead promised both opportunity and peril. Hidden somewhere in those rugged canyons and mesas, a criminal organization was stealing the foundation of honest ranchers' livelihoods. Rosa and Jake represented the only hope of exposing the truth before more families suffered the Morrisons' fate. Their horses picked their way carefully along narrow mountain trails as the morning light revealed the vast wilderness stretching before them. Rosa's Apache skills and Jake's knowledge of cattle operations would be tested to their limits in the hours ahead. Behind them, the Valdez Ranch continued its daily routines without Rosa's familiar presence. Soon, her absence would be discovered, and questions would be asked. She could only hope that when those questions came, she and Jake would have found the answers that could save everyone. The ride to Devil's Canyon tested every skill Rosa had learned from her Apache grandfather. They traveled through terrain that challenged both horses and riders, following ancient hunting paths that wound between massive red rock formations and hidden valleys. Jake's healing shoulder caused him obvious discomfort, but he never complained or asked to rest. By midday, they reached the rim of Devil's Canyon and looked down into a vast network of interconnected gorges. The view revealed why this location would appeal to cattle rustlers. Multiple water sources fed green meadows that were completely hidden from the main roads. A herd of any size could graze here undetected for months. There, Jake pointed to distant movement in one of the lower valleys. Those are definitely cattle, and far too many for any legitimate operation in this area. Rosa used her hand to shield her eyes from the desert sun. She could make out hundreds of animals scattered across the grassland below. Even from this distance, the mixed colors and sizes suggested cattle from multiple ranches had been gathered together. "How do we get closer without being seen?" she asked. Jake studied the canyon walls and surrounding terrain. "We need to leave the horses here and approach on foot. Those rock formations will provide cover if we're careful." They secured their mounts in a sheltered area with access to water and grass. Rosa removed her traditional Apache moccasins from her saddlebags and changed from her riding boots. The soft leather soles would allow her to move silently across rocky surfaces. The descent into the canyon required careful navigation along narrow ledges and steep slopes. Rosa's childhood experience climbing these formations proved invaluable as she guided Jake along the safest routes. Her grandfather had taught her to read the rock faces for stable handholds and secure footing. As they moved closer to the stolen cattle, details became clearer. Rosa could identify brands from at least 6 different ranches, including the distinctive V-shaped mark of the Valdez family. The discovery that her employer's cattle were among the stolen animals made this mission personal for her. "Look at the organization," Jake whispered as they crouched behind a boulder formation. "They have guards posted and a systematic grazing rotation. This isn't random theft, it's a business operation." Rosa counted at least 8 men watching over the herd. They were well armed and displayed the confidence of people who didn't expect to be discovered. Their camp showed signs of permanent establishment, with substantial shelters and supply stockpiles. "We need to get closer to see their records," Jake said. "Rustlers this organized keep track of their inventory and sales." The approach to the rustlers' camp required every stealth technique Rosa had learned. They moved during the afternoon heat when the guards sought shade and were less alert. Rosa led the way, testing each step carefully and using hand signals to guide Jake's movements. They reached a position near the camp where they could observe the rustlers' activities without being detected. Rosa's enhanced hearing, developed through Apache training, allowed her to catch fragments of conversation from the guards. "Sheriff says the search parties are focusing on the eastern ranges," one rustler reported to his companion. "Morrison's boy is probably dead by now, but they want to make sure." "Good," replied another voice. "We move this batch to the buyers in Colorado next week. The boss wants everything clean before the territorial governor sends his investigators." Rosa and Jake exchanged meaningful glances. The rustlers' conversation confirmed their suspicions about Sheriff Rodriguez and revealed that higher authorities were planning their own investigation. This information was crucial for timing their evidence gathering. As evening approached, the rustlers prepared their camp for night watch rotations. Rosa observed their patterns carefully, noting which guards were most alert and identifying the best times for infiltrating their supply area. "Their records will be in that large tent near the water source," she whispered to Jake. "The leader's quarters are always placed for quick escape and resource access." Jake nodded his understanding. "We wait until the middle night watch. Guards are least alert between midnight and dawn." They retreated to a secure hiding spot among the rock formations and settled in to wait. Rosa shared dried meat and water from her supplies while they planned their approach to the rustlers' camp. The hours passed slowly as they listened to the sounds of cattle and distant conversations. Near midnight, the rustlers settled into their night watch routine. Rosa could see 2 guards patrolling the herd perimeter while another remained near the campfire. The leader's tent showed no signs of activity, suggesting he was asleep. "Now," Rosa whispered. They moved like shadows across the canyon floor, using their earlier observation to avoid the patrol routes. Rosa's moccasins made no sound on the sandy ground, and Jake had learned to follow her movements exactly. Reaching the tent area, they discovered that the leader's quarters were protected by more than just canvas walls. A wooden chest sat near the sleeping area, secured with a heavy lock that would require tools to open. Rosa examined the lock carefully in the moonlight. Her grandfather had taught her practical skills for surviving in hostile territory, including methods for opening secured containers. Using a thin piece of metal from her belt buckle, she worked carefully at the lock mechanism. The chest opened with a soft click that seemed loud in the quiet night. Inside, they discovered exactly what they had hoped to find: detailed records of cattle theft, sales agreements, and correspondence with corrupt officials. Jake carefully removed several documents while Rosa kept watch for any signs of movement in the camp. The papers included lists of targeted ranches, schedules for cattle drives, and, most importantly, letters signed by Sheriff Rodriguez coordinating protection for the rustling operations. One document particularly caught Rosa's attention. It was a map showing planned attacks on remaining ranches in the territory, including a detailed assault on the Valdez property scheduled for the following week. The rustlers intended to steal Don Carlos's entire herd and burn his buildings, just as they had done to the Morrison family. "We have enough evidence," Jake whispered urgently. "We need to leave before the guards change." They carefully returned the remaining documents to the chest and secured it as they had found it. The trip back to their hiding spot required the same careful attention to stealth, but Rosa's confidence grew as they successfully avoided detection. Once safely concealed among the rocks again, they examined their collected evidence by moonlight. The documents provided complete proof of the conspiracy involving Sheriff Rodriguez and several other local officials. Most importantly, they had concrete evidence of planned attacks that could be prevented if the information reached honest authorities quickly. "The territorial governor's office is 3 days' hard ride from here," Jake calculated. "We need to reach them before the attack on your employer's ranch." Rosa felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "Don Carlos and his family trust me. I cannot let them be destroyed by these criminals." They began the dangerous journey back to their horses in pre-dawn darkness. The climb out of Devil's Canyon tested Jake's injured shoulder, but he pushed through the pain without complaint. Rosa guided their path carefully, knowing that one mistake could alert the rustlers to their presence. By sunrise, they had retrieved their horses and begun the urgent ride toward the territorial capital. The journey would require pushing both animals and riders to their limits, but the evidence they carried could save dozens of innocent families. As they rode hard across the desert landscape, Rosa reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since discovering Jake hidden in the guest room covers. What had begun as simple compassion for an injured stranger had evolved into a mission to expose corruption and protect her community. The evidence in Jake's saddlebags represented hope for justice, but also enormous personal risk. If Sheriff Rodriguez discovered their activities before they could reach the territorial governor, both Rosa and Jake would face deadly consequences. The corrupt officials had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence against anyone who threatened their criminal enterprise. Miles passed beneath their horses' hooves as they maintained a pace that balanced speed with endurance. Rosa's Apache heritage included knowledge of desert travel that helped them find water sources and navigate the most efficient routes. Jake's determination to clear his name and protect other ranching families drove him forward despite his physical limitations. By afternoon, they encountered other travelers on the main road to the territorial capital. Rosa felt exposed and vulnerable riding in the open, knowing that Sheriff Rodriguez might have sent word ahead to watch for fugitives. Every approaching rider represented potential danger. "Stay calm and act natural," Jake advised as a group of freight wagons approached from the opposite direction. "We're just travelers heading to town for legitimate business." The freight drivers passed without incident, but Rosa noticed one man studying them with unusual interest. Her instincts warned that their presence might be reported to the wrong people. "We should avoid the main road whenever possible," she suggested. There are parallel trails that will add time but reduce our chances of being spotted. Jake agreed, and they turned onto a lesser-used path that wound through rougher terrain. The decision would cost them several hours, but safety seemed more important than speed at this point. As evening approached, they faced a critical decision. Pushing through the night would bring them to the territorial capital by dawn, but traveling in darkness increased the risks of accidents or getting lost. Stopping to rest would delay their arrival but ensure they could present their evidence effectively. The planned attack on the Valdez Ranch is still several days away, Jake reasoned. Better to arrive safely than risk losing everything in an accident. They found shelter in a secluded canyon that provided protection from wind and concealment from any pursuers. As they settled in for the night, Rosa realized this journey had created a bond between them that went beyond their original circumstances. "When this is over, what will you do?" she asked as they shared their remaining supplies. Jake stared at the star-filled sky above them. "Rebuild, if possible. The rustlers destroyed everything my family worked for, but the land is still there." "What about you?" Rosa had been avoiding that question in her own mind. "I cannot return to the Valdez Ranch after abandoning my duties. Senora Elena will never forgive the deception. Maybe Don Carlos will understand when he learns you saved his family from the planned attack," Jake suggested hopefully. Rosa appreciated his optimism, but she understood the rigid social expectations that governed relationships between employers and servants. Her actions, however noble their motivation, had violated the trust placed in her. As they prepared to sleep, Rosa reflected on the choices that had brought them to this point. Tomorrow would determine whether their dangerous mission succeeded in exposing the corruption that threatened every honest rancher in the territory. Dawn brought both hope and urgency as Rosa and Jake prepared for the final push to the territorial capital. Their horses had rested well, but the animals showed signs of hard travel from the previous days. The remaining journey would test everyone's endurance as they raced against time to prevent the planned attack on the Valdez Ranch. They reached the outskirts of Santa Fe as the morning sun climbed above the surrounding mountains. The territorial capital bustled with activity as merchants, government officials, and travelers conducted their daily business. Rosa felt both relief at reaching their destination and anxiety about presenting their evidence to authorities who might not believe their story. The territorial governor's office occupied an impressive adobe building near the central plaza. Armed guards stood at the entrance, and well-dressed officials moved purposefully through the corridors. Rosa suddenly became aware of her travel-stained clothing and dusty appearance, wondering if they would even be granted an audience. "We need to clean up before approaching the governor," she suggested. "Our appearance might work against us." Jake agreed, and they found a modest inn where they could wash and purchase more presentable clothes. Rosa used some of her savings to buy a simple dress that would be appropriate for meeting government officials. Jake managed to find clean shirt and trousers that made him look more like a respectable rancher than a fugitive. An hour later, they approached the territorial governor's office with their evidence carefully organized in Jake's leather portfolio. The guards initially seemed skeptical about granting them access, but the mention of urgent information about cattle rustling and corruption opened doors quickly. Governor Martinez proved to be a stern but fair man who listened carefully as Jake and Rosa presented their story. The documents they had retrieved from Devil's Canyon provided compelling evidence of the criminal conspiracy, but the governor's response surprised them both. "We have been investigating these activities for several months," he revealed. "Your evidence confirms suspicions we already held about Sheriff Rodriguez and his associates." Rosa felt both vindicated and confused. "If you suspected corruption, why haven't arrests been made?" "Suspicion and proof are different things," Governor Martinez explained. "Your documents provide the concrete evidence we needed to take action. But we must move carefully to avoid alerting other members of the conspiracy." The governor immediately began organizing a response to the crisis. He dispatched trusted territorial marshals to arrest Sheriff Rodriguez and secure the stolen cattle at Devil's Canyon. Most importantly for Rosa, he sent riders to warn Don Carlos about the planned attack on his ranch. "Your employer will be protected," the governor assured her. "But I need you both to remain here as witnesses until the arrests are completed." Your testimony will be crucial for prosecuting these criminals. Over the next 2 days, Rosa and Jake waited anxiously in Santa Fe as the governor's forces moved against the rustling conspiracy. Reports trickled back from the marshals confirming the success of their operations. Sheriff Rodriguez had been arrested along with 8 other corrupt officials. The stolen cattle were recovered and arrangements made to return them to their rightful owners. Most satisfying for Jake was news that his father and brother were safe and would soon be able to begin rebuilding their ranch with compensation from recovered stolen assets. The rustling ring had accumulated significant wealth that would be distributed among their victims. On the 3rd day, a familiar figure appeared at their inn. Don Carlos Valdez had traveled to Santa Fe personally to thank Rosa for saving his family and property. His presence created an emotional moment that Rosa had not expected. "Senora Elena was wrong to judge you harshly," Don Carlos said formally. "Your actions showed greater loyalty than we had any right to expect. We would be honored if you would return to our household." Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes. "I abandoned my duties without permission. I thought you would never forgive such behavior." "You chose a higher duty," Don Carlos replied. "Protecting innocent families was more important than arranging bed linens. That shows character that we value highly." Jake watched this reunion with mixed emotions. His growing feelings for Rosa made him hope she would choose a different path, but he understood her attachment to the family that had provided her stability and security. That evening, as they walked through the plaza of Santa Fe, Rosa and Jake discussed their uncertain futures. The rustling conspiracy had been defeated, but both of their lives had been permanently changed by their dangerous mission. "Will you rebuild your family's ranch?" Rosa asked as they sat beside the fountain in the central square. "Yes, but it will take years to recover what we lost," Jake replied honestly. "I'm not sure I can offer you the kind of life you deserve." Rosa considered his words carefully. Her feelings for Jake had grown during their shared dangers, but she also understood the practical realities they faced. "What kind of life do I deserve?" "One where you're valued for your courage and intelligence, not just your ability to serve others," Jake said passionately. "You saved dozens of families with your bravery. You deserve to be a partner, not a servant." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a territorial marshal with news that changed everything. Governor Martinez wanted to offer Rosa a position as a liaison between his office and the Apache communities in the territory. Her unique background and demonstrated abilities made her ideal for helping resolve conflicts between different cultural groups. "The position pays well and would give you independence," the marshal explained. "The governor believes your skills are too valuable to waste in domestic service." Rosa felt overwhelmed by the unexpected opportunity. A government position would provide security and respect she had never imagined possible. But it would also mean leaving behind the familiar world of the Valdez Ranch and embarking on an entirely new career. Jake encouraged her to accept the governor's offer. "This is your chance to make a real difference for your people. The Apache communities need someone who understands both worlds." 2 weeks later, Rosa began her new position in the territorial government while Jake returned to his family's ranch to begin rebuilding. They parted with promises to correspond and visit when possible, but both understood that their paths were leading in different directions. Rosa's work with the Apache communities proved both challenging and rewarding. She helped negotiate peaceful resolutions to land disputes and served as a translator during important meetings between tribal leaders and government officials. Her unique perspective, combining Apache heritage with experience in Mexican-American ranch culture, made her invaluable for bridging cultural gaps. 6 months after the rustling conspiracy was exposed, Rosa received an unexpected visitor at her office in Santa Fe. Jake Morrison had traveled from his rebuilt ranch to bring news and a surprising proposal. "The cattle business has recovered better than I expected," he reported. "The territorial government's compensation helped us rebuild quickly, and we've formed partnerships with other ranchers for better security." Rosa was pleased to hear about his success, but she sensed he had come for more than just sharing good news. "I've learned something important during these months apart," Jake continued. "Success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. I want you to be my partner in every sense of the word. Rosa felt her heart racing as she understood his meaning. Are you proposing marriage? I'm proposing a partnership between equals, Jake clarified. You could continue your work with the territorial government while helping me develop the ranch. We could build something together that honors both our backgrounds. The proposal offered everything Rosa had discovered she wanted: respect, independence, love, and the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to her community. After careful consideration, she accepted Jake's offer with the understanding that their marriage would be different from traditional arrangements. Their wedding took place at the Valdez Ranch, with Don Carlos proudly giving Rosa away as a gesture of respect for her service to his family. Apache traditions were honored alongside Mexican customs, creating a celebration that reflected the cultural diversity of their territory. Governor Martinez attended the ceremony and announced that Rosa's position with the territorial government would continue after her marriage. The governor had come to rely on her diplomatic skills and cultural knowledge for maintaining peace between different communities. As Rosa and Jake began their new life together, they faced the challenges of building both a successful ranch and a marriage between two people from very different backgrounds. Rosa's Apache heritage and government position complemented Jake's ranching expertise and business connections. Their ranch became known throughout the territory as a model of cooperation between different cultural groups. Apache workers were employed alongside Mexican vaqueros and Anglo cowboys, creating a diverse community united by common goals. Rosa continued her liaison work with tribal communities while also managing the business aspects of their ranch. Her education and government connections opened doors that would have remained closed to a traditional rancher's wife. Years later, when visitors asked Rosa about her decision to leave domestic service for government work and ranch partnership, she would smile and tell them about the morning she discovered an injured stranger hiding beneath bed covers in a guest room. Sometimes life chooses our path for us, she would explain. My Apache grandfather taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right despite being afraid. The territory eventually gained statehood, and Rosa was appointed to help write laws protecting the rights of Native American communities. Jake's ranch became one of the most prosperous in the region, known for fair treatment of workers and innovative approaches to sustainable ranching. Their children grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable with Apache traditions and modern American business practices. Rosa made sure they understood their heritage while preparing them to succeed in a changing world. The rustling conspiracy that had brought Rosa and Jake together became a footnote in territorial history, but its resolution had created lasting changes in law enforcement and government oversight. Corruption remained a constant challenge, but the systems put in place made such large-scale criminal enterprises much more difficult to establish. Rosa often reflected on how a moment of compassion for a wounded stranger had transformed her entire life. What began as simple human kindness had evolved into a partnership that bridged cultural divisions and created new possibilities for everyone involved. In quiet moments at their ranch, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in brilliant colors, Rosa and Jake would remember their dangerous journey to Devil's Canyon and the evidence that had saved so many innocent families. Their love story had been born from courage and justice, creating a foundation strong enough to support whatever challenges the future might bring. The Apache Maid who had once moved silently through the corridors of a great hacienda had become a respected leader whose influence extended throughout the territory. Her discovery of a disturbance under the bed covers had led not just to personal happiness, but to lasting changes that protected entire communities from those who would exploit their trust.